As the Dolphins commence their general manager search, what kinds of things should we be valuing in potential candidates? I'm glad you asked. That's here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer at A to Z Sports. I want to thank each and every one of you for helping to make the Locked On Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network. It's an honor to be a part of your daily listen because it is your teams every day. And those of you who tune in every day, we appreciate each and every one of you. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So, did the spontaneous Dolphins 7-round mock draft yesterday. Starting to get into some general manager conversation pieces, right? And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've got 9 different criteria. And they're not all weighed the same as far as things that I got a list of 31 names, 31 candidates, potential candidates in the NFL that have either been put on lists as up-and-coming executives or people who have formerly been executives in other places, or maybe people that are high-ranking executives in other places that maybe would like the title and a change of scenery. You name it, right? Young, old, man, woman, scouting background, lawyers who have gotten into front offices, all the full spectrum, right? The full spectrum. And I've got persons on this list with as many as 8 out of the 9 criterion checked. I've got persons with as few as 2 of the 9 criterion checked, right? But the objective of me coming up and curating a list is I want to be as exhaustive as possible. Because this is, I think, and I believe I've said this on the show, I know I wrote this for A to Z, this has a chance to be the defining hire of the legacy of Stephen Ross. Because executives can, if you get them right, transcend players and coaches. It's the foundation of which your entire football operation is built. So it's a really important window and period of time. And no matter what the Dolphins do or do not do from here, I don't want to get it twisted. This is massive change coming to the Miami Dolphins because the last time the Dolphins went outside of their own building to hire a general manager, it was Dennis Hickey, who lasted 12 months, and then Mike Tannenbaum was brought in over top of him as a vice president of football operations. And the time before that was Jeff Ireland, and that happened before Stephen Ross bought the majority stake of the team. It's been that long. This is a huge deal. This is a huge moment. Has the opportunity to be a huge moment in a good way in the history of the franchise. So you got to stick the landing, which means we need to uncover every possible stone. So that's where, for me, I think looking at the list that I have, and it's got names from former GMs John Dorsey. It's got names like Don Aponte, who's the chief administrator of operations for the NFL office, who has connections with Stephen Ross and has been in the Dolphins organization. Kind of the right-hand men in some of the front offices I really admire across the NFL, like Matt Berry and Nolan Teasley from the Seattle Seahawks. It's got the assistant general manager of Buffalo, Terrence Gray, Alec Hallaby, who everybody knows is the buzzy name from Philadelphia, the next Howie's protege. Will McClay, vice president of player personnel in Dallas, but doesn't have the GM title. And I know he just signed an extension last year, but I'd pick up the phone and ask for an interview for sure. Ray Agnew in Detroit, Jon-Eric Sullivan in Green Bay, Champ Kelly, John McKay with the Rams, Ed Dodds with the Colts, Mike Greenberg in Tampa Bay, Louis Riddick's on this list. Jim Nagy, the former executive director of the Senior Bowls, now the general manager of the Oklahoma Sooners. He's on the list. He's got extensive NFL scouting background, all different kinds of backgrounds, right? The thing that is the most challenging is you don't get a chance to talk to them. Now, there's a lot of great interviews that are out here for a lot of these folks because of the positions that they've held. I think the number one thing you have to avoid is career scout. I think there's too many extra layers that go into the decision-making process now with advanced analytics and economics and the cost benefit of everything and positional value and the margins of transactions and the draft and trades and contracts, the salary cap management. There's a lot of pieces of this puzzle that I really found those who ranked higher on this list did so in large part because they have some kind of extra background, right? As compared to, oh, he was a scout here and then he was a scout there. Well, maybe they have their master's in business administration. Maybe they got a doctorate in law practice, right? Maybe they, like Champ Kelly as an example, worked at IBM, right? And there's all different kinds of educations and guys with roots and guys who, before they got into front offices, it's a really fascinating talent pathway, if you will. Interns in the cap offices that work your way up because you had an accounting background, all kinds of stuff, right? I just don't want career scout. If that's the path you took, I would hope you have something extra to bring. And I think like Ray Agnew in Detroit's a great example of that, where Ray Agnew was a former player. So he's walked their shoes. But then also during his time in Los Angeles, he was involved in like player development. He was not just a regional scout, right? So Ray Agnew was drafted 10th overall in 1990 by the Patriots, and he played until 2000 with the Rams. His first operations, like in the front office role, was in 2017, from 2017 to 2020 with the Rams under Les Snead as the director of pro personnel. And then he goes to Detroit with that regime that got put in 2021 as the assistant general manager. But he was also involved in I think he was doing sermons with the team. So he's walked the walk as a player. He's been a part of personal development. Then he was with director of pro personnel, and now he's been in Detroit, and he's been in two really successful front offices with Los Angeles and Detroit. And I can tell you that's one of the criterion that I do have is multiple exposures in multiple successful programs to see how it's done in different places to help you formulate instead of to draw the player comparison or the coaching comparison. Think about the book of offensive coaches that Brian Flores had at his disposal when he became the head coach in Miami. Josh McDaniels bottlenecked the entire offensive coaching pipeline of the Patriots' Bill Belichick tree. So every coach that goes to leave does not have, oh, this positional coach can come be my OC and, knows how it works. And then you got to recycle through a bunch of names because you only know one way and you don't have access to those people to be able to replicate what you did in that other place. So to only be a part of one organization, that can be, it's not a defining trait, but it's something that I value those who have stopped at multiple places that have been successful programs to see the different ways that you can integrate the scouting information, the data, the financials, the cap strategy, the trade philosophy, different schemes, building teams in light of different schemes for different coaches. Having a diverse background is really important for me in the 31 names that I have written down. I think that's a really attractive trait. We're going to talk about some of the other criteria that I do have next here on Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on all of the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you missed the start of the game or if you want to ride a hot hand throughout the course of the game, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your bets live in a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game more exciting, especially when your team is the one making that late game push. And with no Dolphins football this weekend, we need all the extra excitement that we can get. So right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to sign up. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Criteria that I value. I think connections is very important. Who have you overlapped with? Some of it may be relevant to the coaching staff in place in Miami. I think that would, in part, be short-sighted and potentially a mistake for the Dolphins if that was the exclusive criteria in which they're hiring. Right? I would not hire somebody who's worked with Mike McDaniel because I know they're going to get along well with Mike McDaniel. Because I think checks and balances is a big piece of this puzzle. We've talked about not just being a scout and having some other inherent value to bring to the table. I think the cherry on top, and this has been talked about, a couple of guys on the beat have written columns about this, and I know I touched on this on my show. A cherry on top for me would be somebody who understands Miami and the organization and the community and the fan base and the heritage and who gets it, right? Because this is a place where there has been created a very large amount of pressure to win because the Dolphins have the longest active drought without a playoff win in the NFL as things currently stand. And the path in which the team tried to go about optimizing their roster with this previous build and Chris Greer and how your colors changed every season depending on who's with you from a coaching perspective and your philosophy, and you kind of get flippant with the draft picks. And if you understand how this organization became one of the gold standards in the league, and that becomes, it's very counterintuitive in some ways because Miami is a fast city, right? There's a lot to do. There's a lot of excitement. And teams usually aspire to take on the personality of the city that they're in. But when Miami was great, and what has made the Heat great, and what made the Panthers great in this current iteration of the Florida Panthers is kind of the inverse. It's the blue collar, gritty toughness element. And I'm not saying you got to come out and you got to spend your first 12 draft picks on offensive and defensive linemen. Now, I think you need to continue to pour investments and be over invested in those areas. And I think we're on our way to being able to say that is factual, but we're not quite there yet based off of how 23 and 24 were handled and how the interior defensive line kind of got glossed over because we had a bunch of snap sponges in there. But, it's control the line of scrimmage. right? It's not, Dan Marino came in and kind of rewrote the passing record books, and that's kind of been perceived as what Miami wants to recapture again, going back to like hiring names like Joe Philbin. But I think you go back further and you wind back to Don Shula and what Don Shula did to make it successful. And that has overlap with Pat Riley and the Panthers with Barry Zito, Bill Zito. But that's a cherry on top. I don't think that can be a disqualifying variable, because there's only a handful of players on this list, or executives on this list, that I would classify as having an understanding. And that would be like names like Don Aponte, who worked here, Champ Kelly, who's the interim here now. Brian Gain is one of the interim GMs or assistant GMs in Buffalo. He's on this list. Marvin Allen, who's the assistant GM, who I can't imagine is going to get serious consideration, but I have him down because he is the assistant GM and he's been in-house. Alonzo Highsmith, who's got lots of ties to South Florida. He's got some ties to some good names as well. But some of the other criteria that I'm looking for is where he's lacking a little bit. But obviously, he was just down here with the Canes not that long ago before going to New England. And then Glenn Cook, who played in Miami with the Hurricanes as a linebacker. He's the assistant general manager in Cleveland. And that can tie into the word of caution bit of this. That's my third bullet point. I think it's very difficult, and this is what makes it hard for us to know who's good candidates and who's not. I don't think it's as easy as just looking at, are they coming from a good team? And let that determine, yeah, you should hire this guy or no, you should not. Because Myles Garrett is the best defensive player in football, and the Browns most years are losing 12-plus games. That doesn't mean Myles Garrett's not a great player. Myles Garrett's not the single most determinant variable in what is happening on the field, to use the football analogy. And the same thing for, unless you are in the captain's chair and we have a resume and a body of work of what you did as the primary decision maker in your spot, I don't think you can judge on results. I think you have to assess these guys off of process and what they've been and what they say and what their beliefs are. Because if you pick the person with good process, who's convicted in their process, which is what the last general manager was not, and then that player has, that executive has good connections to put the right people around him to have the right conversations through good process, it will generally take care of itself. You will generally make enough good decisions through good process. You won't be perfect. But if you're convicted and you stay the course and you stay your path and you don't take shortcuts with good people around you and good process, you should build a competitive roster and one that you can actually sustain, and not for 3 years. And then you got to flush the whole thing out because you got 1 year, 35-year-old veteran Band-Aids who are here for the wrong reasons and they're not invested in your program. Because that's what happened with this last bill, right? So that's the word of caution. I kind of stole that out from segment 3. I don't think it's as simple as get a football guy who's a scout. Right now, there's guys who have been career scouts for a really long time that I think are really attractive for some of their other background pieces. And that's why like Will McClay's on this list. Will McClay's got an amazing background. If you're not familiar with it, Will McClay, let me get his actual bio up. But he's become like the prized personnel guy in Dallas. He's the vice president of player personnel and has been since 2017. So he played for the Detroit Drive, which I believe was an indoor after playing at Rice. He was a DB at Rice, and then he played in an arena league in Detroit. And then he coached in the indoor league. And then he's working his way up to defensive coordinator in the mid-90s. And then he's the assistant head coach in Grand Rapids with the Rampage. And then he's the head coach of the Dallas Desperados from 04 to 08. And then he's simultaneously getting into and overlapping with Jacksonville in 01 as assistant director of pro scouting. And then he's in Dallas as a pro scout from 02 to 08, as he's also the head coach of the Dallas Desperados. And then he's director of football research for Dallas. And then he's the senior director of pro and college scouting in 2015 and 16. And he's been the vice president of player personnel ever since. So this is the AFL Coach of the Year in 06. Former player, scout, coach, executive, football research. There's a lot of extra here, right? It's not just, oh, well, I was hired as a part of the Ravens have their like 2020 club, which is you're in your 20s and you're hired for $20,000 and you work your way up through the system. And I've got a candidate on that list too. But it's not just because he's been working for the Ravens since he was in his 20s for $20,000 and been a career scout in a good organization, right? But the guys that bring the extra stuff with the extra context, those are the ones that really captivating to me. Spoiler alert, Will McClay, if you can get the interview, and he's taken interviews with other teams. Now, he agreed to a multi-year contract extension in 2005, but if you're talking about a title raise and you're talking about a pay raise, I'm definitely picking up the phone and asking. I don't expect you will get Will McClay. I think Will McClay will stay in Dallas. But he's on the list because I'm going to make Dallas or I'm going to make Will McClay tell me no from inquiring about my position. I have some other final thoughts on criteria to look at. We'll touch on some of those. I'm not going to get into too many of the names because I kind of want to be in depth with the names when we do the name content. So some other criteria look coming your way next here at Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at Peloton. Look, folks, it's time to break through the busiest time of the year with a brand new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus that's powered by Peloton IQ. It's Peloton's most elevated technology and equipment yet that gives you real-time guidance, and it gives you endless ways to move, whether you want to work out by yourself or if you want to work out with your favorite instructor, like my personal favorite, Alex Toussaint. He always gets me fired up to tackle the day. And the thing I like about Peloton, it helps me achieve more in less times. They have features that help you plan, stay motivated, track your progress, and Peloton IQ also provides personalized workout plans and recommendations. That's something that I use right now during the busiest time of the year covering the NFL. They plan my workouts for me based on my mood, my vibe, and also my favorite instructors. So make sure you check it out and use it because it also helps you correct your form in real time, and it maximizes your reps. It counts your reps so that you can do it smarter, safer, and more efficient. Let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
Criteria that I have, and this is not all that I'm ultimately going to have before I finalize my list, but I already do have a clear hierarchy of a top 12 out of this list of 31 names. Understand South Florida. We talked about that and why I think it's important relative to this specific franchise, what they're trying to recapture relative to the typical talking points of other cities that have NFL franchises. Player evaluation background is a part of the puzzle, but it's also paired with, do you have coaching experience? Do you have an administrative background? Do you have some kind of higher education that can bring extra value to managing a bunch of different information systems and thought criteria all pulled together to optimize your decision-making process? Because this is no longer just I watched that guy on film, I like him, we're picking him. Especially in a place like Miami, right? There's some places where you can go and there's a lot less to do. But when you're in Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Miami, I think those cities have a lot of extra things that make picking the right people and then paying the right people after you've had them in the building and they perform for you really important. And that's something that we have watched snakebite the Dolphins several times in the last 3 years, as far as who are you choosing to pay or double down on paying, and how are you rewarded for the decisions on where you're investing extra money in to serve as your hallmark players. I do think it's valuable. Those who have been a part of a successful drafting decision at quarterback to be a part of that criteria, to be a part of that experience and those conversations and parse through and how do you identify a good fit for a player in a situation. So were you a part of a successful quarterback draft, not as the general manager or the primary decision maker, but were you exposed to a cycle in which you went through that search and successfully identified a player who was a hit? We talked about part of multiple successful programs to be able to further hone and formulate a fluid set of foundations, and this is who we are, and this is who I want to be, and this is how I want to build a program, as compared to, well, I was in Seattle for 15 years, and this is how John Schneider did it, and I'm not John Schneider, but I'm going to do it the same way John Schneider would, even though I don't have any of the people that John Schneider was a part of, as an example. And I use that complimentary to Seattle because I love their front office structure. I love the way that they go about their business. I love the way that they have successfully and unconventionally kind of gone off the beaten path and built multiple highly competitive teams. I admire the hell out of that. I do. But how replicatable is it? Do you have other front office / coaching connections that can bring additional value to the organization if you have to make changes elsewhere within your hierarchy? I do look at the draft record of that team, and I try to limit it to when the candidates have been in higher level titles. Like, I'm not looking at Brandon Brown's draft record before he was the assistant general manager of the Giants, right? I'm not looking at Champ Kelly's draft record when he first got in with Denver, right? But as the assistant general manager of the Raiders, yes, I think those are important to identify. Do you have success on day 3? Do you have success on early drafts? What kind of mistakes did you make on early drafts? While also knowing you were not a part of the final decision that was made, right? It makes it very muddy to put too much weight into that one. And that's why I think there's things that you can very clearly qualify with value. And then there's things that are a little bit more gray area that you want to take into consideration and value, but you can't speak definitively and with full confidence in the role that they had. Like, what is Alec Halaby's influence on Howie Roseman's decision-making process? You listen to Alec Halaby do interviews and he's like, yeah, I worked through Howie on hypotheticals for draft weekend. Okay, how do I value that, right? Like, but then I look at your education and I listen to you doing some of the sports information roundtables that are available on YouTube, and I get a much better feel for what is your football philosophy. And I know what your education is. And I know that you've been, your background comes with a lot of higher education and administrative background. And I can tangibly quantify that as compared to, oh, I help Howie go through hypotheticals in the draft room. So how much can I really weigh the draft record in Philadelphia for Alec Halaby? So that's why I don't value everything the same. And then I've listened to a lot of YouTube interviews and videos on these candidates, and then talking about whether it's Andy Weidel and coming to Pittsburgh from his stops in Baltimore and Philadelphia and what he's trying to do for Omar Khan, or listening to John Dorsey while he was the general manager in Kansas City or Cleveland. These things are all still up on YouTube, and you can, go back with the benefit of hindsight and listen to what their thought process was. And you can identify if the process was good or if the process was not good. You can, some of these guys are a little bit harder to find. There's not too many things in the way of interviews for Nolan Teasley and Matt Berry from Seattle. There's not too many things with Marvin Allen. There's some good stuff out there for names like Josh Williams with San Francisco, who's their director of scouting and football operations. And he's got some great connections, including some with guys currently on the staff. Some good interviews with Ian Cunningham, Glenn Cook, Will McClay obviously has a very front-facing profile, Jon-Eric Sullivan. And I will tell you of the names that I have, of the 31 names, I'll put the name Jon-Eric Sullivan out there to you all now as the executive candidate who, when you take these variables and you weigh them how I'm choosing to weigh them with the current list I have, he has the highest score. Jon-Eric Sullivan, who is the vice president of player personnel with the Green Bay Packers. We'll talk more about him and some of these other top candidates in the very near future. Kyle Krabs, that's it for me. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. Thank each and every one of you for helping to make Locked On's podcast network the #1 sports podcast network. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. We've got the live squad show a little after noon today as well with Grease and Jeff Scanina. So we hope you will come back and see us then. I'm out of here. Go Fins.